Hello, this is going to be a video lesson on our Asian Indian love poetry. Now, we just finished our Egyptian love poems from the Ramesses time period, and next we're going to be looking at some poems from 7th century India. Now, as far as these poems, they're very appropriate to study with the Egyptian poems because you're going to see some similarities and also some differences between them as far as their themes and also their speakers' feelings about love, whether it's love in its innocent form or love in its passionate erotic form. Now, as far as the Asian Indian poems, I do want us to look, if we can, at a quick slideshow. And if you want to look along with this, it's letter G, and this is the slideshow right here. Now, as far as the poems we're going to be looking at, they would have been called kavya poems because that was a genre of literature written by our court writers or poets. And the poems would have looked very similar to this one right here. They actually would have had artwork to depict a particular scene that would be relevant to the poem that's being depicted. Now, as far as the time period, as I mentioned, this was going to be a time period in 7th century. Again, India. It was a time when there were, many dynasties fighting for control. And it's always interesting how when there's political unrest, great literature comes from that. Okay, we're going to see that later when we look at our Chinese nature poems later in the class. Now, as far as our author, now our Egyptian poems, we did not know the author of those works. However, for our Asian Indian love poems, we do know the author of our poems for today. And his name is Amaru. Now, Amaru, he is considered probably one of the most famous Indian love poets. Okay, one scholar even said of him that it's well known that a single stanza of the poet Amaru may provide the flavor of love equal to what's found in whole volumes. And he does give a huge perspective of all the different emotions that we feel when going through love, whether it's love in its newest most wonderful form, love out of tune when we're having disagreements or arguments with our lovers, or love lost when we lose that individual, whether it's to someone else or due to circumstances. Now, as far as the Amaru Sotaka, that actually means 100. We have over 100 poems written by Amaru that give us the essence or flavor of love, but we're just going to be looking at 3 poems today, and 2 of those are actually going to be different translations of each other. Now, I do want to make sure that you understand some of the literary aspects of this, and also you understand some of the belief systems in relationship to kind of just emotions and understanding within the Asian Indian culture. Now, the first thing that I want you to understand that Amaru, as far as like by, I guess you'd say, infamy, is he's in some ways described as the master of the lyrical poem, which would be called the Mritaka genre. Now, he again, as I mentioned, is a Kavya poet. Kavya poets were Sanskrit literary style, was a literary style that was used by Indian court poets in the 7th century. Now, Sanskrit was an ancient Indo-Aryan language, and it is the classical language of India and of Hinduism. So again, we have the English translation of this particular work. So I'm sure in its original form, it has more of the flavor of love than what we have in our American English version, but we can still appreciate those emotions. Now, as far as other ideas that you need to understand in relationship to Asian Indian love poetry, I'm sure all of you have heard of the Kama Sutra, of course, that guidebook of how to pleasure your lover, but not just sexually, but also emotionally. That is actually from a wider science of erotics in Asian Indian culture called the Kama Tantra, which is the science of erotics. The Kama Sutra, again, was a Sanskrit text which essentially gave rules of sensuous and sexual pleasure in love and in marriage in accordance with Hindu law during that time period. I think most of us think of it in respect to the sexual positions, but it's so much more than just sex, okay? There's so much more beautiful emotions that are involved in that particular text. Now, you're going to notice very similar to our Egyptian poems, we do have some imagery, but we do have a lot more metaphors, similes, and hyperboles, tons of exaggeration for emphasis. Now, as far as the themes of Kavya poetry, you do need to understand within Indian culture and Hinduism specifically that there's 9 rasas. These, in a sense, are just kind of just feelings, emotions, and they're just aspects that define those emotions and feelings. Now, what's really cool is these are major concepts behind any classical aspect of Indian art, whether it's theater, music, dance, poetry, even sculpture. I don't know if you've ever eaten at an Indian restaurant and there's someone dancing in the background. All of those different dance movements are symbolic of a type of rasa or emotion. Okay, so they're telling a story through bodily movements that are representative of emotion. So you could watch a dance and it's telling a story of all these different emotions the dancer is feeling or maybe portraying. Now we're going to be finally, looking at one particular rasa, which would be love, which is called Sringara. Now you're going to see very quickly in our poems for today, you're going to have Sringara when it's in unison, and also Sringara when it's in separation. Love in tune, love out of tune. Because sadly, love is not always an emotion that is enjoyment. Sometimes there's heartbreak, there's disagreement that's there, and we're going to see those. Now, as far as the speaker of Amaru's poems, usually it's not a speaker addressing the actual lover, okay, of him or her, but usually it just evokes an erotic mood. There's moments or stages in a relationship that's just, it's a glimpse, just a little blip in the relationship, almost like a memory that you have about an aspect of a relationship that you're in or you have been. It's almost like Amaru presents that memory to us, whether it's a memory of feeling pleasure or it's a memory of feeling heartbreak in a sense. Now, we're first going to be looking at a poem, which is poem 23. Now, again, if you'll go to Canvas, if you click on F, this is where you're going to find our two poems, okay? And here are our two poems for today. The first is Amaru's number 23, and then the second is Amaru's 101. Now, as far as in reading these, you may want to reference the PowerPoint as well. You're going to notice as far as with the first one, within the first one, poem 23, we have love in separation. Now, it's not in a, long-term separation, but in 23, there's a common theme in Amaru's lyrical poems known as the Manini, an angry heroine in this case. Now, that anger is called mana, okay, and essentially this anger has been provoked by the hero, okay, or the male lover in the poem. And let's actually, just for a moment, I want us to look at that poem. Now, you're going to notice in 23, you have a very commonplace event. You have a couple who is in bed. Their backs are to each other. They're in some type of agreement. It probably started from something really petty. You can all think of some petty reason for an argument. Maybe someone didn't take out the trash. So maybe someone left a pile of clothes of laundry to the side. Okay, this is an argument that likely started over something small, and the couple allowed it to escalate into something bigger, and now they're going to bed angry. Now, what's beautiful about this poem is you'll notice toward the end of the poem, there's embracing. That means that these two lovers, although they're in discord, they're in arguments, they don't go to bed unhappy, in anger with each other. They come back together. Their backs are to each other at the beginning of the poem, but then they turn toward each other. Notice kind of that image of sideways glances, and they laugh at likely what was the root of the argument, which was likely very petty, something that shouldn't even have caused this rift between them. And then we have reconciliation. So in this small poem, we have, Sringara love out of tune, but by the end of this short 3-stanza poem, we have love in tune, which is very, very beautiful. Now, Amaru Sataka's poem 101 is a little different. In 101, we have, of course, a more erotic poem. We have this image of someone called a mugda, which would be a timid, inexperienced heroine, meaning a female speaker, and she is relaying her sexual experience, maybe even her first sexual experience with the Nayaka, the male hero in a sense. And let's look just for a moment at that poem. Now, in this poem, you're going to note this speaker is likely, discussing this sexual incident with her friend, and she talks about it with hyperbole. Okay, notice that first stanza, when my lover came to bed, the knot came untied all by itself. Okay, hyperbole at its essence. Obviously, it did not come untied by itself. She's so caught up in the emotions and passion just of that sexual moment, she forgets everything. A little bit later, she even says, I couldn't remember it at all, who he was, who I was, or how it was. She was so overwhelmed by that passionate moment that it's going to stay with her for the rest of her life, especially if we have that image of her first sexual experience. So I want you to see, as far as 101 and 23, very different aspects of love, whether it's a love that is out of tune and comes back to reconcile at the end of the poem, or in this case, it may not be as much love, but it's a moment of sexual passion that this particular speaker is discussing with her friend because it's so memorable. Now, you're going to notice in the textbook, I did ask you to read, okay, 572. Now, 572 is very much a different translation of 101. Now, you're going to notice it's very similar, but I just wanted you again to appreciate, like we did with the Egyptian poem, how a translation can sort of change the interpretation to an extent. I encourage y'all, with all of the literary works that we've read this semester, we only have one translation. I want you to read other translations of these works, okay? Get into the habit of, if you really like a literary work and it's obviously translated from another language, find as many translations as possible, because I promise you, with each reading, you're going to find something even more eye-opening and rewarding from that new translation, because sometimes the translator brings in something that the previous translator didn't bring. All right. Well, I hope that you are enjoying our poems for this week. Again, between the Egyptian love poems and also the Asian Indian love poems, hopefully you have some beautiful works that can give you a glimpse into that emotion of love, of passion, and understand it's timeless. This is not something new that we only feel in our modern era. This is a passion that's been felt over the centuries. Okay? Thank you.